The wind cut like a blade across the plains, scouring the night with a sound that never quite died. Snow moved sideways through the darkness, not falling but drifting, carried by something older than weather. Beneath it all, the land stretched out in silence, white, wide, and merciless. The moon was a pale bruise behind the clouds, giving no light, only shape. He rode through it anyway. His coat was stiff with frost. The wool scarf wrapped around his face had frozen to his breath. Each exhale made the cloth damp, then stiff, then nearly useless. The horse moved with the weariness of one that had been pushed too long too far, but it kept going. They both did. The cabin wasn't marked on any map. Folks who once knew it had long since stopped caring or died. It crouched between a scraggly clutch of cottonwoods just south of the ridge near where the river used to run before it froze solid. The man saw the faint orange glow before he saw the building itself, a flicker between branches, half hidden. He slowed but did not call out. Inside, a woman knelt near a rusted stove, feeding it bits of dry kindling like prayer. Her hands shook. The fire barely took. Her coat was too thin, her boots cracked at the seams. 4 children lay huddled on the floor behind her, wrapped in what quilts remained thin ones, patched with flour sacks and fraying yarn. One child coughed in her sleep. Another whimpered and was hushed. The door creaked as it opened. She stood fast. The man stepped inside slowly, snow still clinging to his shoulders. He removed his gloves 1 finger at a time, his eyes never leaving hers. They were hollow eyes like hers, rimmed red from cold and grief. He nodded once. That was all. She stared at him, unmoving, a broken poker still gripped in her right hand. She didn't ask who he was or what he wanted. She looked at the frost crusting his beard and the sag of his shoulders and saw no threat. He knelt and opened his saddlebag. Inside, a small sack of dried beans, a hunk of salt pork, 2 tin cups, 1 blackened by fire, a flask. He set them down beside the stove, not as an offering but as necessity. The woman blinked once, then reached for the beans. Later, after the fire had found its legs and the stew began to boil, he sat on the floor with his back to the wall, arms resting on his knees. He did not speak. Neither did she. The children stirred in their sleep as if the warmth had given them permission to dream again. The smell of food softened the edges of the room. Shadows no longer felt so sharp. The woman ladled the stew into 1 cup, handed it to him, then filled the other for herself. She did not eat right away, only held it, letting the heat sink into her palms. He sipped once, then twice. Then he spoke. "You alone out here?" She nodded. He looked at the children, their father, her lips pressed together. Then, quiet as the snow outside, she said, "Gone. Nothing more. Nothing needed." He looked back into the fire. His face was hard to read in the flickering light. Lined, weathered. But there was something soft around the eyes now, something not there when he'd stepped inside. He drank the rest in silence and set the cup down near the wall. "I'll stay the night in the barn," he said, standing. "If that's all right." She didn't answer, only looked toward the back window where the wind howled louder now. The snow had thickened again. There would be no travel tonight. He pulled his coat tighter and opened the door. The cold surged in like a living thing. Before he stepped out, she said, "There's a blanket in the loft. Might still be dry." He turned. For a moment he just looked at her, her thin arms, her hollow cheeks, the weight behind her eyes. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud. Inside, the woman crouched by the fire again, arms wrapped tight around her ribs. She stared into the flames, searching for something. Outside, the man trudged through the snow toward the barn, a dark figure swallowed by the white. The barn was more bones than shelter. Slats in the walls let the wind crawl through, hissing low and constant like breath between clenched teeth. He found the blanket where she'd said it would be stuffed in a corner beneath a collapsed saddle rack. It was rough wool, stiff from time and mice, but it would do. He laid it out in the loft, settled into the straw, and pulled his coat tighter around him. The horse stood below, shifting now and then, letting out a breath that rose like smoke in the frozen dark. Sleep did not come easy. He closed his eyes and saw a different fire, one that burned in the hearth of a house long buried in memory. He saw a woman younger than the one in the cabin laughing as she pulled bread from the oven. A boy barefoot chasing a dog through the yard. He saw the moment it all turned to smoke when the army man with the sharp boots stepped onto the porch and said the war was done, but not for everyone. He woke to silence. Snow had filled the gaps in the walls overnight. The barn had become a tomb of white and wood. He sat up, slow, joints stiff, then descended the ladder and checked on the horse. Still breathing, still warm. Good enough. When he opened the cabin door again, the woman had already stoked the fire. A pot of water steamed faintly. One child was awake, rubbing sleep from her eyes with a tiny shaking fist. The man paused in the doorway, stamping snow from his boots. "Wind's dying," he said. "Should be clear by midday." She nodded and poured him a tin of hot water. No words passed between them as he drank. But something else had settled in the room, no longer the tautness of strangers, but not yet comfort either. Just a kind of quiet truce. She gestured to a pile of wood by the stove, then to the dull axe resting by the door. He took it without a word and went outside. The trees behind the cabin were stunted things bent from years of wind and sun. He felled one, stripped it, split it clean. The rhythm steadied his hands. It was the kind of work that did not ask who you'd been or what you'd lost. She watched him from the window, her arms crossed tight. He did not look up. By the time he finished, the children were awake. He could hear their voices inside, light, reedy, not yet strong enough to carry far. He wiped his hands on his trousers and walked to the creek's edge. With the butt of the axe, he broke the ice and filled a small pail. When he stepped back inside, the woman was sewing a patch into one child's coat needle, moving slow and clean through the fabric. She didn't look up, but she said, "You got a name?" "Jonas," he said. She gave a small nod. "Miriam." He set the pail by the stove and crouched to peel the bark from one of the logs. "Miriam," he said, slowly testing the word. "This place yours was my uncle's. He passed last year. You got folk nearby. Used to." Another silence passed, but it wasn't a hard one. He stayed that day. Hauled water. Chopped more wood. Patched the roof with old tar cloth he found in the barn. The children grew braver, inching toward him when he worked near the door, one even handing him a bent nail from the floor. That night she made a cornmeal mush with the last of the flour. They ate together, all six, in that tight little space lit only by the stove and the single lantern. The children giggled once or twice. He almost smiled. After they were asleep, she sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest. He watched her for a moment, then said, "You've done well." She let out a dry sound, almost a laugh. "You call this well?" "They're alive," he said. "That counts." She looked down, and for a moment he saw her blink hard. Her voice caught. "I thought he'd come back," she whispered. "Even after the first winter. Even after the baby died. I kept thinking he'd just walk through that door." Jonas didn't answer, just listened. After a while she said, "Why'd you come this way?" "I was headed south," he said. "Changed my mind." "Why?" He looked at the children, then at her. "Didn't feel right to keep writing." She didn't respond, but her fingers stopped shaking. Outside, the snow began to melt in slow, steady drips. If this tale steadied your spirits, subscribe and let the next one carry you further. By the third morning, he'd fixed the barn door so it hung straight again. The latch still stuck, but it closed now tight enough to keep out the worst of the wind. He mended the fence too, though there was no livestock to hold. Miriam watched from the porch, arms crossed, one foot braced against the bottom rail. "You fix everything you see?" she asked, her tone light, almost teasing. Jonas straightened, squinting into the pale sun. "Only the things that can't fix themselves." She smiled then, barely. But it stayed. The days grew into a rhythm. He didn't leave. She didn't ask him to. At first they spoke only when necessary: water, firewood, food. But slowly words filled the spaces between chores. He told her about the mule ranch he once worked near Abilene. She told him about the first time she saw snow when she was just 10, watching it fall through the cracks of a boxcar. The children took to him faster than she did. He taught the oldest boy how to carve a whistle from pine, showed the youngest how to feed the fire without choking it. He never raised his voice, never spoke down to them. Just quiet, patient movements, like he was remembering something he'd once known but thought lost. One afternoon Miriam found him in the small garden behind the cabin, turning earth that hadn't been touched in over a year. It was stubborn soil, half frozen and full of rock, but he worked it slow, steady. "You think it's worth planting?" she asked. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. "Don't know," he said, "but it's something to try for." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch beneath a sky crowded with stars. The snow had mostly gone, but the cold hadn't. She wrapped her shawl tighter. He offered her his coat. She refused. "You ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "Whatever life you had before." He thought a long while. "Sometimes, but mostly I miss who I was in it." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. "I used to believe in a lot more," she said. "That people would come back. That love could survive anything. That the land would give if you gave enough to it." He didn't speak. The wind moved through the trees, soft but certain. "I buried my baby out there," she said, eyes fixed on a dark patch in the yard. "I didn't have a coffin. Just wrapped her in my coat." Jonas bowed his head. "I keep thinking I should have named her," she whispered. "You still can," he said. She looked at him then. Really looked. The next day he carved a small wooden cross. Said nothing when he handed it to her. She walked out alone, planted it in the earth with shaking hands. When she came back inside, she cried for the first time since he'd arrived, and he let her. Not with words, not with touch, just by staying. The thaw came slow, but it came. The river loosened bit by bit until it moved again beneath the ice. Birds returned. Green crept back into the edges of the world. And then one morning a rider came. He was young, sharp-looking, coat too fine for the dirt. Brought a letter. Said Miriam's brother had finally sent for her. Promised a house in St. Louis. Money. School for the children. A fresh start. She took the letter with numb fingers. Said she'd think on it. That night Jonas sat out by the barn, hands wrapped around a cup of strong coffee. Miriam joined him, letter still folded in her skirt pocket. "It's a good offer," he said before she could speak. "Wouldn't blame you if you left," she said. "I won't." "Whoa." She looked at him, eyes rimmed red. "But you don't belong here." "No," he said. "But maybe I belong with what's here." She didn't reply. He stood. "I won't ask you to choose, but I won't leave unless you tell me to." Inside, the children stirred in their sleep. Somewhere in the trees a nightbird called once, then fell silent. Miriam's voice was barely a whisper. Then stay. The letter stayed folded on the shelf for 3 days. Miriam never touched it again. The children asked once about St. Louis, what it might look like, how far the river stretched, but she answered only with a soft smile and a stroke of their hair. They did not ask again. Jonas built a chicken coop from the scraps behind the barn, patched with wire and stubborn nails. He worked slow, deliberate, whistling under his breath as he went. Miriam brought him water one afternoon and leaned on the fence while he hammered a crooked board into place. "You ever built a home before?" she asked. He tapped the nail once more and said no. "But I've watched a few fall down." She watched his hands. Strong, scarred hands. The kind that looked like they belonged to the earth itself. "You don't talk much about your people." "I had a father once. A brother. Both gone. Mother's He shook his head. "She left when I was young. I stopped waiting for her before I turned 10. Miriam looked away, eyes narrowing on the horizon. "Then you know?" "I do." The wind rose then, not sharp but warm. Carried the smell of turned soil and pine. Spring or something like it. The fence went up in 2 days. Jonas taught the oldest boy how to brace the posts with rock and wire. Taught the middle girl to dig trenches between rows of beans without wasting water. He worked with them like they were his own. Sometimes at night, after the lantern had burned low, Miriam would lie awake and listen to the small sounds of the house. The creak of the walls in the wind. The soft shift of sleeping children. His footsteps always careful, moving out to check the barn. He never closed the door loud. Never left without looking in on them first. Then one night she found him standing by the fire, staring into the embers like they might speak to him. "You still think about leaving?" she asked. His eyes lifted slow. "I don't think about much else." She stepped closer. "But you're still here." He looked down at the floor. "Because I want to be." She reached for the edge of his coat, fingers grazing the wool. "You think that's enough?" "I think it has to be." She nodded. "Me too." The next morning they worked the garden side by side, and her hands no longer shook when they touched his. She let him trace the lines of her palm with his thumb, the roughness of her skin matching his. They didn't speak about it. It didn't need words. But the world was never far behind. A neighbor rode in from 5 miles north. Said a man had been asking after a cowboy with a bay horse and a burned rifle stock. Said he'd come from Wichita carrying papers and a badge. Jonas went quiet. Miriam waited. "I took a job once," he said that night. "Was supposed to be clean. Just escort a man to the border. He was wanted in Missouri, bank runner, maybe worse. But he had a boy with him. Just a boy. He didn't look at her. I brought them both in. The man fought. Died before the law got him. But the boy, they said I should known better. Said I crossed a line." Miriam's voice was even. "Did you?" "I don't know. I just couldn't leave the boy out there. So I took him to his aunt's. Never signed the bounty. Rode away. And now they're still chasing you." He nodded. She didn't flinch. Didn't move. Instead she said, "You'll stay here tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow." "But if they come?" "They won't find you tonight." Jonas swallowed hard. In that moment he looked like a man who'd been running so long he'd forgotten what standing still felt like. She touched his arm. "You're not who you were then," she said. "Neither am I." He leaned forward, forehead resting lightly against hers. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the gravity of two people who'd been alone too long. In the yard, the fence held steady. In the soil, green shoots broke the surface. The stranger came just after dawn. His horse was lean, and lathered dust streaked up its legs like dried blood. He wore a coat too clean for the road and boots that hadn't known mud in weeks. He dismounted without a word and tied the reins to the porch post like he owned them. Miriam watched from the doorway, arms folded over her chest. Jonas stood behind her, silent. "Looking for a man," the stranger said. "Jonas Ward." His voice was slick, flat. Government trained or bounty bought didn't matter. The kind that saw the world as files and rules and figures owed. Miriam stepped out first. "No Jonas here," she said. The man looked past her, squinting into the dim cabin. "Heard he came through this way. Big man. Bay horse. Scar on his hand." Jonas didn't move. "I've got children sleeping," Miriam said. "If you're bringing trouble, you can turn that horse around." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've got papers. You always show up with papers before breakfast." He clicked his tongue and stepped toward the door. "Ma'am, I just need a look inside." Jonas pushed the door open, then slow and sure. The light hit his face full on. "No hiding." "That's far enough," he said. The man stopped. Jonas stepped out, hands loose at his sides. "I didn't take the bounty. I didn't take a damn cent. That boy's alive. I gave him a name to grow into. What else do you want?" The man blinked. "So you admit it?" "I ain't hiding." Miriam didn't step back, not even as the stranger's hand went to his coat. "I've got 4 children in that house," she said. "You gonna draw a gun with their eyes on you?" A pause. Heavy. Wide. Then the stranger sighed, pulled a folded slip of paper from his coat and dropped it in the dirt. "You've got until next week," he said. "After that I bring others." He mounted his horse and turned without looking back. They watched him ride off, dust trailing behind like smoke. Jonas knelt to pick up the paper. He didn't open it, just crushed it in one hand. "Should have gone when I had the chance," he said. "You still have a chance," Miriam said. "But it's not the one you think." He looked up at her. The morning light was full in her face. There were lines there, lines that hadn't been there weeks ago, but her eyes were clear. "You can run again," she said. "Or you can plant your feet." He didn't speak, not at first. Then with a voice thick as thawed mud, he said, "I ain't running." Later that day he rode to town, found the sheriff, an old man with a limp and eyes that had seen too much. "I'm not here to hide," Jonas told him, "but I won't be dragged in for doing right." The sheriff spat into the dirt. "I've known Miriam since she was knee-high to a mule. If she says you're worth a damn, that's good enough." They shook hands. When Jonas returned, the children ran to meet him. One held up a single perfect egg from the co-op. Another grinned, hands covered in dirt from the garden. Miriam stood on the porch watching. He climbed the steps and held out a small paper sack. Inside, coffee beans and a spool of blue thread. "For you," he said, "in case you still sew." She took it, fingers brushing his. "I still do." That night he stayed inside. His rifle leaned against the wall, but untouched. He read to the children from an old almanac, making up stories between the planting schedules and moon chart. Miriam laughed once, really laughed, when he gave the frost dates personalities. Later, after the lantern was low and the silence wrapped around them like a quilt, he reached for her hand. She led him. Outside, the first true buds had opened on the cottonwoods. A soft wind moved through them, whispering of things coming back to life. By mid-May, the land had softened enough for bare feet. The children tore through the yard after supper, their laughter echoing across the ridge like bird call. Jonas watched from the porch steps, boots off, sleeves rolled, the sun dipping low behind his shoulder. Miriam sat beside him, a bowl of snap beans in her lap. "You ever think it'd look like this?" he asked. She shook her head. "Didn't think I'd make it this far?" He studied her. The way her hair had come loose from its tie, the sun-browned skin at her throat, the small, steady rhythm of her hands as she worked the beans. He wanted to say more, to ask what else she dreamed of now that her world had started to widen again. But the words stayed in his chest. Instead, she said, "That little girl, the one I lost. I think she would like this." Jonas looked at the yard, at the garden pushing up in rows, the coop full of clucking life, the house that no longer felt like a grave. "She'd have been proud of you," he said. Miriam blinked at the beans. Her voice went thin. I named her Lena. He nodded. It's a good name. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not needing to. The quiet was full. 2 days later, Miriam brought out a small wooden box. Inside was a worn silver band dulled with time but whole. It was my mother's, she said. She wore it even when the train took everything, even when my father disappeared into a bottle and didn't come back. Jonas looked at her. She wasn't offering it, not yet. Just showing it. She always told me not to give it away unless I was sure, she said. He waited. She closed the box. I'm not sure, she said, but I'm close. That night a storm rolled in. Thunder low and slow like cattle groaning across the sky. Rain came hard and sudden, drumming the roof until the children squealed and pulled their quilts tighter. Jonas lit a second lantern and checked every shutter twice. When he came back in, soaked through, Miriam was waiting with a dry shirt and a look that made his throat tighten. I don't want you to be someone I lose, she said. You won't, he said. The wind howled. She stepped closer. I mean it. So do I. They stood like that while the storm raged. No kiss. No promise. Just something solid between them that neither one tried to name. The next morning the world was scrubbed clean. Water pooled in the garden rows and the leaves dripped silver. Jonas found the youngest child trying to scoop frogs into a tin cup, grinning like she'd caught treasure. At noon the man from Wichita returned, but he didn't ride up the path this time. He came on foot, hat in hand, quiet. Miriam met him alone. You here for trouble? She asked. No, ma'am, he said. I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. The man almost smiled. You were right. Drawing a gun with children watching, that stuck with me. Miriam crossed her arms. I looked into it, he said. The boy's safe. Aunt's got him in school. No charges were ever filed. There's nothing left to chase but paper. Then stop chasing. He nodded. I will. She tilted her head. That easy? No, he said. But maybe it should be. He handed her a folded note, nothing official. Just a line from a man tired of pretending the law was always right. Jonas never spoke to him, just watched from the window as the man turned and walked away, slow and small beneath the wide sky. That night Miriam brought the wooden box to the table, opened it, pushed it toward Jonas. He stared at the ring, then at her. Still not sure, he asked. No, she said, but I trust the part of me that says you're worth betting on. He reached for her hand, took it slow. We'll go as far as we can, he said, and then we'll go further. The ring slid on smooth. Later, under a quilt stitched from scraps of the past, Miriam lay beside him. Her breath was even, steady. His hand rested on her belly where hope had begun to grow again, new, quiet, and full of life. Outside the wind had stilled. The night was warm and full of crickets. Inside the future waited. The horizon holds more than endings. Subscribe and see for yourself.